Hello, good evening, everyone. Today, our presentation is on legal nuts and bolts of opioid prescription by the nurse practitioners, presented by
Deborah, Osei, Agymen.
Thejaswi, Balla.
These are some of the objectives for this presentation. We'll be looking at an overview of MP opioid prescription. We'll go to an outline of the legal requirement for MPs to prescribe, the DA requirement for MPs to prescribe, enumerate some of the rules and regulations for New Jersey nurse practitioners, and also discuss how to protect ourselves as MPs when prescribing, discuss how our safe prescription impacts our community and the patients, and some case scenarios and questions that we'll be discussing at the end.
The introduction. The independence of the nurse practitioner's prescriptive authority varies widely from state to state, and right now we are looking more about New Jersey state. When prescribing opioids, providers must be aware of the clinical, ethical, legal responsibilities, particularly legislative requirements in their states. The NPs who disregard their responsibilities risk being subject to civil, disciplinary, or coronial proceedings. So it's really necessary to know what are your legal proceedings or regulations.
So with statistics, MPs prescribe like 6.3% of opioids as compared to the MDs and PAs. And in states that give the independence for MPs to practice, they prescribe 20% more than those that are not allowed to prescribe. And with the scope of practice, even though MPs have their scope of practice, depending on the states which they find themselves, the state rules will regulate those scope of practice.
Continuing with the background, the nurse practitioners prescribe less than the physicians according to the literatures. In some rural areas, nurse practitioners are the main prescribers in the front line, and NPs account for third largest share in prescribing opioids when compared to the physicians in their family practice and internal medicine.
So in the wake of opioid crisis, the federal policymakers had find ways of potentially curbing the opioid crisis. At the federal level, we have the CDC that issued guidelines guiding prescribers on opioid prescriptions, and also at the state level, we have the state rules and regulations to ameliorate the effect of opioid crisis.
In 22 states and the District of Columbia, nurse practitioners have full practice authority. While compared with the other states, the nurse practitioners must have either a collaborative agreement with the physician or pass a probationary period before earning a practice and prescriptive authority. During and the post-pandemic COVID, several states, including New Jersey, have issued an executive order lifting the barriers of nurse practitioner opioid prescription. It is crucial that all prescribers are aware of comply with legislative requirements.
So with some terms and abbreviations that will be used throughout this presentation, we have the CES, which stands for controlled substances. They are either narcotics or depressants or stimulants. We have the CDS, which are controlled dangerous substances, CSA, DEA, which is the Drug Enforcement Agency, opioids, we know are substances that work on our nervous system, and the scope of practice, which is SOP.
So in this slide, we will be seeing the federal agencies which will be regulating nurse practitioner opioid prescription. There are many agencies. Those are Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, the CDC, and the Food and Drug Administration, the FDA, which is a federal agency which will be regulating NP opioid prescription, and DEA, that is Drug Enforcement Agencies. The DEA is also implement use of PDMPs currently administered at the state level, the Department of Justice and the Board of Nursing.
So now we'll look at the legal requirements for an NP to be able to prescribe opioids. You have to first complete education and training, pass the board by licensure, get your MPI number, complete a 6 contact hours education with the DEA on controlled substances, and then get your DEA license. But nevertheless, we should know that some states prohibit nurse practitioners from prescribing opioids, and you need a collaborative agreement to do so.
Legal requirements continued. Some states require nurse practitioners to enroll in prescription drug monitoring program, controlled substances reporting system, or both, in order to prescribe opioids. 49 out of 50 states have implemented PDMPs to monitor controlled substance prescribings. NPs are not permitted to prescribe Schedule I controlled substances. Nurse practitioners must abide by the prescribing guidelines for the state where the prescription is to be filled.
In order for the NP to prescribe opioids, you also have to get a DEA waiver to prescribe buprenorphine as an antidote to opioid overdose. So if you're treating more than 30 patients, you have to complete a 24-hour specialized training to prescribe this buprenorphine. And also the training will include 8 hours of waiver education and an additional 16 hours of training. All this is just to control or to prevent opioid crisis or overdose.
So this is the drug scheduling guide of United States. Schedule 1 to 5. Schedule 1 is most potential for abuse and dependence and no medicinal qualities. This is why nurse practitioners are not supposed to prescribe Schedule 1 even if they have a DEA number. Going forward, Schedule 2 to 5, the nurse practitioners can prescribe it. Schedule 2 is a high potential for abuse. Schedule 3 is moderate potential for abuse. Schedule 4 is low potential, while Schedule 5 is lowest potential for abuse.
In order to prescribe opioids, you have to complete the 6-hour contact hours DEA education and apply for the DEA number. DEA number will only be issued to the nurse practitioner if they practice in a state that allows them to prescribe opioids. DEA is due for renewal every 3 years, costing about $731. Every 3 years, it's automatically issued by the 45th day towards expiration, and the nurse practitioner will have to renew it at that time.
Let's say the legal pitfalls in opioid prescription by nurse practitioners. With some states having strict guidelines regarding nurse practitioner prescription practices, it can be tempting to overcome these rules for the sake of convenience. For example, in Georgia, one physician has signed blank prescription sheets so the nurse practitioner can use it in his day off. So when the federal agencies raided the clinic where the physician worked, he served 7 months in federal prison as a federal law prohibits pre-signed off prescription.
The issue of the pitfall or legal pitfall in opioid prescription is really a matter of overprescribing or underprescribing. It's very difficult for a nurse practitioner to identify which patient is going to either illegally use the medication, that's the opioid medication, or use it for its intended purposes. So to avoid the scrutiny of legal pitfalls or being sanctioned or persecuted, the MP ends up undertreating the patient with actual pain, and this is bad. And
the best practices for safe opioid prescription by the nurse practitioner are: for safely prescribing opioid, the nurse practitioner should conduct a comprehensive assessment and ensure evidence-informed treatment, that is, to assess completely the patient if it is necessary to treat with opioids or not, and assess the patient for misuse and diversion, conduct screening, and keep it complete the treatment agreements. And also, it is necessary for the nurse practitioner to educate the patient regarding follow-up and reduce risks such as addiction of opioids.
Before starting treatment, the nurse practitioner should find out that it's very necessary for the patient to get the opioids. If non-opioids could be used, you could start with that and start with the immediate release first. You could also start with low doses, start for less than 30 days. Most states require less than 7 days or 7 days starting, and then prescribe their medications in compliance with your state's regulations or requirement, and also your workplace, their policy, order according to their protocol. With the best practices again, it's better the nurse practitioner starts with short-acting opioids so that it doesn't stay in the patient's system for long to avoid overdose, and also discuss frequent risks and benefits of the medication. It's also good that you know about the PDMP in your state, because this will also help you regulate or monitor the patient to prevent any abuse. Taper off the doses to your lowest dose possible if it's needed or required.
The nurse practitioners currently have many mobile apps in order to guide them for safely prescribing opioids. The CDC website has an opioid guideline app which can be utilized for safely prescribing opioids, and in order to reduce opioid crisis, the nurse practitioners can adopt to this opioid guideline mobile app and opioid guideline clinical tools, and then they can safely prescribe opioid medication to the patients.
In New Jersey, for one to prescribe opioids, you have to undergo the education training, graduate from the MP school, pass your boards, get your MPI number, complete the 6 contact hours of education on controlled substances, get your DEA number, and whenever you work, if they need a collaborative agreement, you have to gain the collaborative agreement with the physician. This agreement has to be renewed, revised, updated every year for the MP to continuously prescribe opioids.
Prescribing rules for nurse practitioners. The nurse practitioner to prescribe the opioids should be under the collaborative physician with a joint protocol developed. The nurse practitioner should prescribe on the prescription pad, which has a collaborative physician name, address, and telephone number, and it should mention the nurse practitioner. The nurse practitioner should write her name on it. And the nurse practitioner can prescribe Schedule 2 to 5 controlled substances, and it is necessary the nurse practitioner follows the NJPDMP.
During the pandemic, These barriers to NP prescription of opioids have been actually lifted. The governor issued the Executive Order 112, and this order eliminates or waives off the barriers for NPs' scope of practice, or they allow NPs to practice fully, and this includes their opioid prescriptions. So now in New Jersey, currently, the NP can prescribe Schedule 2 to 5 medications without a collaborative agreement.
So here, these are the few of DEA rules which are encouraged to follow for the prescription pads. Safety: keep all the prescription blanks in a safe place, and it's better to use temp-erased and prescription pads, and write out the actual amount to reduce the forging of prescription, and use the prescription blanks only for writing prescription pad, not for writing any notes, and never sign prescription blanks in advance to avoid going to the prison, and assist the pharmacist when they telephone to verify about any information.
How does safe opioid prescription impact our community? It impacts positively in the sense of quality care will be given. It avoids compromising the patient's safety. Medication errors will then be avoided, which will then significantly impact our social, financial, and legal consequences. It reduces opioid misuse and their crisis. NPs will then avoid litigations, and reasonable pain management will be given to the patients. Real case scenario: an NP prescribed oxycodone for a man who comes in pain, and this man in turn sells the oxycodone to a student who ingests it and dies. Now the NP is being trialed because he prescribed large amounts of opioids to this man without a thorough assessment, and because the medication was too much at the time and too excessive, this man was able to sell part of it to the student who ingested and died. So we should be careful with the amount of opioids we prescribe at the time.
In this case, the nurse practitioner was operating from home, that is, she was managing the patients from her home. The nurse practitioner prescribed opioid prescription for a patient. The patient the nurse practitioner assumed the patient was having a legitimate pain, and the prescriptions were written in good faith. But the patient was a drug dealer. The nurse practitioner failed to assess the patient completely and then prescribe medications. So it is necessary to completely assess the patient before prescribing the medications.
In this next case, a 37-year-old with extensive pain history being managed by a doctor. The doctor referred the patient to the NP for continuous management, just to share responsibility. But then the physician forgot to tell the NP about the letter that he had received from the insurance about the patient's potential methadone abuse. So the nurse practitioner just went ahead, her due diligence, assessed the patient, prescribed the opioids, but then didn't know about the letter, and she was.
Sample questions: can an NP prescribe a medication for themselves? No. Is a nurse practitioner practicing illegally when the physician supervisor is more than 50 miles away? No. It's there in the same geographical location. What are the requirements for an NP ordered Schedule 2 controlled substances? The NP should get a DEA registration and get the DEA number. Are NPs considered as prescribers? No, unless they have a DEA number. Can the NP with the NPI number use the physician's DEA number? No. These are the detailed answers for the questions in previous.
Here are the references for this presentation. Any questions or comments or concerns?